My name is Randy Marchany, and I'm the University IT Security Officer for Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. And my office is responsible for running all of the cyber protection capability for the university, protecting the university's network resources, sensitive data resources, and general access to the university network. Since we assume that we have machines in our network that are compromised, we recognized a long time ago that the strategy of trying to keep the intruders out has failed, and quite frankly, if it succeeded, we wouldn't have had these breaches. We wouldn't have had all these massive data breaches that have happened. And what happens is a lot of organizations were so focused on watching incoming traffic that they very rarely paid attention to what left their network. But because we're open, we know that people are coming into our network. It's kind of like when somebody says, I want to do a pen test of a university network, and I'm like, you're going to pen test an open network? Go for it. I mean, but what that does is it makes us look at what leaves our network. And so, as our legal counsel once told me, it's not a breach till it leaves our network. And so we focus on outbound traffic patterns. And that's where continuous monitoring comes in. We look at the network traffic. We look at the controller's office. 90% of the traffic goes to bank clearing houses and credit card handling companies and things like that. And they're in specific locations on the internet. And then we see a small transaction go to a site in Eastern Europe somewhere. Well, if we see that, I might call you up and say, hey, Leo, did you guys just sign a new contract with the Bank of Eastern Europe or whatever? And if you said yes, well, okay, then that goes into the good column. But if you say, what are you talking about? Then we have a lead that something happened there. So now, is it easy to do? No, by no means it's not easy to do. You have to have really good log analysis engines. You have to have network flow analysis, which is kind of like water flow, how much traffic goes from one machine to another. And this is where the new technologies are starting to roll in. But when you hear the big phrase now, big data and big data analysis. Big data analysis and continuous monitoring really go hand in hand now, because you are collecting large amounts of data. The idea is that you're not looking at it to collect the data and analyze it immediately. You're looking at it as the moment I get notified of an event, now I start researching past data. So as an example of continuous monitoring, we get notified either through our sensors or somebody outside, another company saying, hey, we're seeing something attacking us from your network. So we go in and we determine that, yes, the machine was infected by some sort of malware. It's talking to a bad domain site as a controller site. So we know right away from this point in time you were infected, okay? We go back and start searching through the continuous monitoring data that we collect, however far back we have it, to see if there was an earlier communication between you and the bad domain site. And if there was, now that gives us a window. The first point in time was the time that we got notified when somebody else discovered it. But now we have a window where, you hear the industry say, oh, it's 200 days before somebody notices that they've been compromised. Well, that initial day point is what we're looking for, okay? So that's the first thing, is how long has the machine been compromised? The second part of continuous monitoring comes in that now that I know that your machine's been compromised, and that you've been talking to this bad domain site, I want to know who else in my network that bad domain site has been talking to. And so now that's a containment phase. An incident response, that's your containment phase. So now that I know that a bad domain has been talking to one machine in our network, I want to look in my data and see if it's been talking to any other machines in my network. And if it has, then I have some more compromises. So this is the beauty of the continuous monitoring piece. It is data collection. It requires substantial investments in software and hardware, changing your focus. But in the long run, I think it gives you a much better idea of what your security posture is. I'm a SANS instructor, so when I teach in the SANS classes, I ask people, I say, hey, would you allow me at Virginia Tech to ping a machine inside your network? No, we would never allow that. And then I say, would you allow a user inside your network to ping me at Virginia Tech? Oh yeah, we would. And so what that tells me right away is you're more focused on me coming into your network than a user coming out. This is why phishing works, is because they send you something, right? And your firewall blocks an unsolicited connection attempt. But if you initiate the connection outbound, it's no longer unsolicited, because all your firewalls and all your sensors say, well, it came from inside going out, so I'm going to let outside come back in and talk to you. So metrics plays a really strong role in your continuous monitoring strategy from a number of standpoints. From the executive standpoint, my board of visitors, my CIO, the president of the university will ask us, well, how many times are we getting attacked? A great example that happened with us is about a year or two ago, we forced a massive password change on our single sign-on IDs. And, a lot of people, obviously, why are you making me do this? Why are you making me go from my favorite password, my dog's name or whatever, right? And so, but what we should use the metrics there was, we could show that on average, there's probably 100,000 password guessing attempts made against user IDs on our systems in our network. And that the majority of them come from machines outside of our network, but in the US or other countries, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, China, Asia, South America. And so by saying, look, these guys are probing, what they're doing is they're just going through a list of dumb passwords or dictionary words trying to get access to your accounts. And a lot of times when you use a metric like that to explain why you're doing a security measure, like forcing you to change your passwords on a regular basis, or using two-factor authentication, or having at least a long password, that makes it easier to sell what it is you're doing. So that at the executive level, that's certainly metrics play a key piece in that, because they control the purse. If I need something to address a threat, I want to be able to show just how bad the threat is. From an operational standpoint, metrics like this thing about brute password attacks or brute force password guessing attacks, then we can see are the majority of these guessing attacks aimed at a particular business process in the university, or is it just a scattershot thing? So if we say, for instance, the 100,000 brute password attempts from the U.S., but we notice that 70,000 of them are directed at our controller's office or our bursar's office, or some financial office of the university, well, that gives us an indicator that somebody's trying to get some financial data from us, or student data, or sports data. So using those metrics from an operational standpoint really helps us to, again, focus. Well, maybe what we need to do is maybe we segment our financial networks, or we add more sensor capability on the financial networks, because we're seeing more activity aimed at those sectors. As we move more and more to wearable devices, and the Internet of Things. One unique thing that Virginia Tech is doing is with IPv6. IPv4 is the standard Internet addressing capability. You've heard the industry talk about they're running out of addresses. Well, they have. The next one is IPv6, and it's been not adopted by a lot of institutions and organizations around the net. They think it's a major investment. It really isn't. But what it does is it gives you a huge number of addresses to work with. So we've been in a production IPv6 network since 2005. And so what this means is running out of addresses is not going to be an issue for us. To give you an idea of the size of IPv6, if you represent all of the addresses in the IPv4 world as being the volume of a beach ball, all the addresses in the IPv6 world is the volume of the sun. We're talking about a huge expansion of addresses. So one of our IPv6 subnets is 10 to the 19 addresses in it. The entire v4 internet right now has about 10 to the 10. So just one of our v6 subnets has twice as many addresses as, well, twice as many if you work your math, weird. But it has a much larger address space than the existing v4 net. What that means is how attackers scan us change. It's to go through one of our subnets, which in v4 land would be 256 addresses. In our example, it's 10 to the 19 addresses. So to go through 256 addresses, start at address 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, well, it's not going to take you a long time. But to go through one of our subnets in v6 world, we calculated out 10 to the 10 years. So we're not going to see this type of script kiddie scanning. We're going to see targeted scanning. So I find a website that has a v6 address, and then I kind of take advantage of the fact that since we have to keep track of those addresses, we cluster them. It's kind of like flying over the Midwest at night, right? You look over, you see a lot of dark space, then you see a cluster of lights, and a lot of dark space and a cluster of lights. Well, that's what it is there. So what we're going to see is a change in the scanning technique. So we have to plan accordingly. The wearable devices, as we were talking about Internet of Things, medical devices, air conditioning, environmental control devices, cars, laboratory data acquisition equipment. We have microscopes now that are connected to the network with the embedded Windows XP. Well, but Windows XP supports, been dropped. So this legacy software, is the new thing that we're going to have to worry about. And in a sense, it really does push us back more to continuous monitoring stuff. As the students are coming in, as the next generation rolls in, this technology is they grew up with it, and part of the problem that we run into is senior management way up. Well, we're talking 40 years ago when we were in our 20s and stuff like that. And so, it was a big mainframe then, it's hard to get that transition. But I think one of the big things for continuous monitoring is we're going to see a huge spike in the number of devices that can connect to the network. And once again, it goes back to really redoubling our efforts to protecting the individual data elements or data files. And that's a big challenge there. And then, as one of the panelists this morning mentioned, how do I know that it was you that actually paid off a credit card or made a minimal payment? How do I authenticate that you're the one that initiated that transaction, especially if you're using a wearable device or a smartphone or anything like that? So that's kind of where I see the big challenge for us to come in. I also think that if you start thinking as not being the CISO of a healthcare company or a bank or anything like that, but think of it now that you're really becoming the CISO of a small town, then, or an ISP. Even if you want to just say, I've got my corporate and then I'm an ISP. Those two models, the challenge is figuring out a security model that works in those two environments. That's where I think we're going to be in 19.